Colorado Territory, June 1874. The fire turned the night sky orange over the valley, smoke rising in thick black streaks as screams echoed through the hills. Zadie Hart stumbled across the field behind her burning farmhouse, her baby pressed tight against her chest, her legs cut and torn from broken stalks and sharp rocks. She did not stop to look back. She already knew what she would see. Her home was gone. Her husband was dead. And the drifters who had done it weren't far behind. Her baby, barely 6 months old, whimpered against her shoulder. She hushed him with a kiss to his soft hair. "We're going to keep moving, Theo," she whispered, voice shaking. "We're going to make it out." She had seen their faces. 5 men, all hard-eyed and filthy, riding under a crooked black flag. They had come 2 days ago asking for water. Her husband, John, had offered it. By sundown, they had beaten him to death in the yard, tied Zadie to a post, and set the barn aflame. She had escaped only when one of them passed out drunk by the fire and the rope burned through. Now, bleeding and barefoot, Zadie ran. She crossed the creek behind the property, the cold water numbing her ankles. Theo stirred in her arms but did not cry. She had wrapped him in a flour sack torn into strips, her only blanket gone with the fire. She climbed the ridge that led into the foothills, the moon just rising behind her. Somewhere far below, a man shouted. They were looking for her. Zadie ducked beneath a low pine and crouched, clutching Theo against her chest. Her breath came hard and ragged. Sweat stuck her hair to her face. She had nothing, no food, no shoes, no weapon. Just her baby and the will to keep going. She stayed hidden until the first light touched the peaks. Then, with legs stiff and arms aching, she rose and kept walking. The drifters must have turned back during the night. Or maybe they thought she would die out here on her own. By late afternoon, the sun was high and cruel overhead. The land had changed, more rock than grass, trees thinning out. She had no idea where she was anymore. Her lips were cracked. Theo had stopped making sounds. She stumbled down a slope and tripped over a root, falling hard onto her knees. Theo let out a thin, dry cry. Zadie held him tight, rocking, whispering, I know. Just a little longer." She did not hear the horse at first, but then the crunch of hoofbeats came from beyond the ridge, slow and steady. She froze. A man rode into view a moment later, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dust-covered brown coat and a wide-brimmed black hat. His horse was lean but strong, and he carried a rifle across his back. He pulled up when he saw her, his hand going to the reins. Zadie stared at him, too weak to run, too afraid to speak. He dismounted, staying cautious, his voice low. "Ma'am, you all right?" She shook her head. "Please, my baby. He needs water." The man stepped forward, pulling a canteen from his saddle. "Let me help." Zadie hesitated, then loosened her grip just enough for him to pour a trickle of water onto Theo's lips. The baby drank greedily, eyes fluttering open. Zadie almost cried from relief. "I'm Luke Fallon," the man said. "I was headed toward Trinidad. Saw smoke in the hills yesterday. Figured it was trouble." "It was," she said hoarsely. "They killed my husband. Burned everything. I ran." Luke looked at her, then at the baby, then back to her again. "How far have you come?" "I do not know." "Since last night. You need rest. And food." He looked around, then motioned to his horse. "I've got a camp a mile up. You can ride with me." Zadie swallowed hard. She did not know him, but she had no choice. Her legs were shaking under her. "I'll walk," she said. "Just help me carry him." Luke nodded and gently took Theo, cradling him with surprising ease. Zadie stumbled after them, each step a fight against pain. The camp was small, just a bedroll, a fire pit, and a pack tucked under a tree. Luke handed her a tin cup with beans and jerky, and she ate slowly, eyes never leaving Theo as he slept curled in her lap. Luke sat across the fire, quiet, respectful. He did not ask questions she was not ready to answer. As the stars came out, she finally looked up and whispered, "Thank you." He met her eyes. "Nobody should be out here alone. Not with a baby." She nodded once, then looked down at Theo. "His name is Theo." Luke's voice softened. "He looks strong. Like his mama." That made her chest tighten in a way she did not expect. She cleared her throat. I need to get somewhere safe. Somewhere they will not find us. I can take you south, Luke said. Toward Raton Pass. Maybe farther. I will keep watch tonight. Zadie hesitated. Then she nodded. All right. She lay down next to Theo, wrapping her body around him. The fire crackled low. Luke stood a short distance away, rifle in hand, eyes scanning the dark woods. He did not sleep. When morning came, they rode out. Zadie sat behind Luke on his horse, her arms around his waist, Theo wrapped safely between them. The warmth of Luke's back, the steady beat of the horse beneath them, it felt like safety. They rode for hours, stopping only to rest and feed Theo. Luke spoke little, but his presence was steady, grounding. On the third day, they came to a fork in the trail. Luke slowed the horse and looked back at her. There's a town west of here. Quiet place. Might be a good spot to disappear. Zadie looked at the open land stretching before them. Then she looked at Luke. Will you go with us? He held her gaze. If you want me to. She did not speak for a long moment. Then she nodded. I do. A flicker of something passed through his eyes. Relief. Maybe hope. They rode on. That night they camped near a river. Zadie bathed Theo in the cool water, then wrapped him in her shawl and laid him by the fire. Luke sat nearby, sharpening his knife, his sleeves rolled up, forearms marked with old scars. Zadie watched the way he moved, deliberate, calm. She walked over and sat beside him. I thought I would die out there, she said softly. I really did. You did not, Luke replied. You kept going. Zadie looked at him. Because of Theo. And now, because of you. His hand paused on the blade. He looked at her, his voice low. You are not alone anymore. She leaned against him just slightly. He did not move away. And for the first time since the fire, Zadie felt like maybe everything had not ended after all. Maybe something had just begun. The hills gave way to flatter country by the fourth morning, dry grass rustling along the trail like a whispered warning. Luke rode with one hand on the reins, the other steadying Zadie as she sat behind him. Theo swaddled between them beneath his coat. The air had turned cooler, the sky a pale, watchful gray. They passed a half-buried fence line, broken at the posts. Zadie leaned closer. Was this a homestead? Used to be, Luke said. Family named Reynolds. I passed through a few winters back. They had hogs and a girl who played fiddle like she was born holding it. She looked back at the splintered gate. No house left, just a foundation and a chimney standing alone. What happened? Hard season. Fever took 3 of them. The rest moved east. Zadie didn't answer. Her fingers tightened slightly around the saddle horn. Luke didn't press. The silence between their words had grown comfortable, like a blanket worn thin and soft from use. By noon, they spotted a rusted sign nailed to a cottonwood tree. Over 6 miles. Luke pointed his chin toward the west. That town I mentioned. Still want to try it? She nodded. They won't be looking for me in a place that small. He gave a short nod and urged the horse forward. The town of Dover sat low in a shallow basin. A few buildings huddled around a dry well and a wind-warped church. A grain store, a smithy, and a schoolhouse that leaned a little too far to the left. A long corral held a pair of mules and an old bay gelding. There were no more than 20 souls moving about, all of them slow and quiet. Luke dismounted first and helped Zadie down. She shifted Theo carefully and stepped onto the packed dirt street, her boots borrowed from Luke's saddlebag, too large but holding together. A woman with a flour-stained apron leaned against the door of the mercantile, arms crossed. Luke nodded politely. Ma'am, we're looking for someone who might take on a housekeeper and a helping hand. She looked Zadie over, then the baby. You married? Zadie hesitated. Luke met her eyes. She squared her shoulders. Widowed. The woman jerked her chin. Talk to Miss Fenton over at the boarding house. She's short a pair of hands and her knees have gone bad. Luke offered to carry Theo while Zadie walked across the street, her stride steadier now. A bell tinkled as she stepped inside the boarding house. Luke waited outside, rocking Theo gently. Minutes passed. Then the door opened again and Zadie stepped out, her face unreadable. She said I could stay. There's a room upstairs. She offered $1 and meals if I sweep, wash, and mind the stove. Luke nodded. That's fair. She asked if you were my brother. He raised a brow. What did you say? I said no. Her voice softened. But I didn't know what else to call you. Luke didn't answer right away. Then he shifted Theo into her arms, careful not to wake him. Call me what you want, he said quietly. But I'll be around. If you want that. Her eyes searched his face. You don't even know me. I know enough. That night, Zadie sat on the edge of a narrow cot in a room that smelled of old soap and lavender. Theo slept beside her, cheeks flushed warm. She stared at the single window, the moonlight pooling on the wood floor. A knock came, soft. She crossed the room and opened it. Luke stood in the hallway, hat in hand. Didn't mean to wake you. You didn't. I'm staying in the hayloft at the livery. Figured I'd check before turning in. She stepped back. Just enough. You want to come in a minute? He hesitated, then crossed the threshold. The room was small but clean. He looked at Theo, then at her. You did right by him. She folded her arms. I wasn't sure I had. You did. She sat again, motioning to the second chair. He lowered himself onto it, hands resting on his knees. The silence stretched. I used to be a carpenter, she said at last. Back before I married. Helped my father with barns, porches, things like that. Folk always thought it odd. Not me. She looked at him then. What about you? Drove herds out of Dodge for a while. Then I quit. Got tired of sleeping with a rope under my head. She smiled faintly. You're still sleeping in a hayloft. Yeah, but I choose it now. The lamp flickered. Outside, a dog barked once, then went quiet. She stood, walked to the window. I keep thinking one of them will show up. The men who? They won't come here. It's too far, too quiet. Towns like this got their own rhythm. Strangers stand out. She turned back to him. And if they do? I'll be here. She studied him a moment longer, then nodded. All right. Luke stood, adjusted his coat. I'll be back tomorrow. You need anything, send word to the stable. She followed him to the door, watched him walk down the hall. Before he turned the corner, he paused. Good night, Zadie. Good night, Luke. She closed the door, leaned her back against it, and let the hush of the room settle around her. Outside, the wind had picked up, brushing the shutters like a promise. Theo stirred softly in his sleep, and Zadie crossed the room to lay beside him, her hand resting on his back, the other curled against her chest. She didn't dream that night. But when morning came, she woke with a quiet steadiness she hadn't felt since the fire. Something had shifted just slightly, like the earth beneath her feet was beginning to hold firm again. By the end of June, the wind carried dust more than rain, and the sun had settled into its high, relentless rhythm. Zadie worked from before dawn, wiping down the boarding house tables and hauling wash water from the well. Miss Fenton, stiff in the knees but sharp in the tongue, spent her days perched on a cane-backed chair near the hearth, doling out instructions with a flick of her finger. Zadie listened without complaint. Hard work was familiar, predictable. Theo slept in a basket beside the wood stove while she scrubbed floors and boiled coffee. When the guests came down for their morning meal, Zadie kept her eyes low and her hands busy, learning which drifters passed through quietly and which ones lingered too long in their stares. Luke returned each evening just before the sun dipped behind the far ridge. He'd hitch his horse behind the livery and walk the block to the boarding house, boots dusted and sleeves rolled to his forearms. He never stayed long. He'd sit on the stoop with Theo in his arms, rocking him gently while Zadie finished her chores, his voice low as he hummed some tunes she didn't know. One evening, after the guests had gone to their rooms and the hall had quieted, she brought out a tin of stew she'd set aside for him. I know it isn't much, she said, handing it to him. Luke took it wordlessly, then nodded toward the baby. He's getting heavier. He started grabbing at things. Nearly tipped the basin over this morning. Luke smiled, then took a bite. You settling in all right? I'm learning who's who. The schoolteacher comes down too early and always leaves her eggs. The peddler from Kansas City chews tobacco but pretends he doesn't. He laughed low and rough. That sounds about right. She leaned against the post beside him. Miss Fenton let me fix the window latch in the back room. Said she hadn't seen a woman hold a chisel proper since her father's time. Luke looked up. You still got the hands for it? They remember more than I do. He set down the tin. You think you'll stay here? She watched the sky grow darker, stars beginning to pierce through the velvet dusk. If I keep my head down, maybe. But I don't want to hide forever. You shouldn't have to. He didn't say more, just sat with her in the hush of evening, the soft sound of Theo's breathing between them. A week later, a rider came in from the south. Weathered hat, saddle worn smooth, rifle slung across a faded jacket. He bought a single meal and drank 2 mugs of coffee without speaking. Zadie watched him from the kitchen doorway. Luke came in late that night and noticed the tension in her shoulders. Something wrong. She wiped her hands on her apron. That man in the corner. He asked Miss Fenton how long I'd been working here. Said he was looking for someone who owed him money. Luke's jaw tensed. You believe him? No. He looked at Theo too long. I'll stay close tomorrow. Zadie hesitated. I don't want trouble brought to this place. We'll handle it quiet. She nodded, and that night Luke didn't return to the livery. He slept in the back pantry with the door propped open, his rifle within reach. Zadie curled on her cot with Theo, every creak in the floorboards drawing her eyes to the dark hallway. By morning, the rider was gone. Luke was waiting at the stoop, a tin mug warming in his hands. He rode out before dawn, left without a word. Zadie sat beside him, her legs stiff from a night of shallow sleep. You think he'll come back? I think he was scouting. But he won't come alone next time. She looked down at her hands. I can't keep running. You don't have to. But you don't have to face them alone either. Zadie looked up at him. Why are you doing this? You don't owe me anything. Luke didn't answer right away. Then he met her eyes. Maybe not. But I want to be here. She studied his face. Even if it gets dangerous? He nodded. Especially then. That afternoon, she went to the church at the end of the street. The preacher's wife, a quiet woman with rough knuckles, offered 2 yards of muslin for baby clothes and asked no questions. Zadie returned to the boarding house with her back straighter, her chin lifted just slightly higher. She found Luke behind the building, splitting kindling. He looked up as she approached. I was thinking, she said slowly, if I had a room with a little more space I could take in mending. Maybe even some light carpentry again. Luke set down the axe. I could help. Build a bench. Fix the hinges. Her voice softened. You really planning to stay? He walked toward her, closing the space between them until she could see the faint scar near his right eye, the fine lines at the corners of his mouth. If you'll have me. Zadie didn't speak. Instead, she reached forward, her hand resting against his chest. Beneath her palm, his heart beat steady and sure. She felt something loosen inside her, something long held and tight. She leaned in and he met her halfway. The kiss was slow, honest, like the land they stood on, weathered, solid, and real. When they pulled apart, she whispered, Then let's build something. He nodded. Together. And for the first time in a long time, the word felt like a promise that could hold. The summer deepened, and with it came the slow rhythm of steady work and quiet change. The threat lingered somewhere beyond the hills, but in Dover, time moved with the steadiness of worn hands and sun-faded days. Zadie began mending for townsfolk in the evenings, sewing patches into trousers and reinforcing seams on calico skirts. A stool borrowed from the schoolhouse served as her workbench, and Luke repurposed a crate lid into a lapboard for cutting cloth. Theo had begun to crawl in uneven, determined bursts, dragging himself across the floor of the boarding house kitchen while Zadie stitched by the firelight. Miss Fenton, forever seated in her corner chair, had taken to muttering observations about the boy's crooked crawl and the shape of his ears. Zadie listened with half an ear, her attention always split between the needle and her son. One afternoon, Luke returned with a bent nail caught in his palm and blood across his knuckles. "Caught it fixing the corral gate," he said, brushing off her concern. "Wood's warped bad. Needs replacing. But the smith says he's low on planks." Zadie pulled him inside and cleaned the wound with boiled vinegar. Her hands were efficient, fingers sure despite the sting in the air. "You need to be careful," she said, wrapping the cloth tight. "I am. This doesn't look careful." He tilted his head. "You remind me of someone when you talk like that." "Who?" "My older sister. She took a branding iron to a ranch hand once for teasing her about her boots being too worn. Said she didn't take advice from anyone who hadn't birthed a calf or buried a husband." Zadie looked at him. "Where is she now?" "Wyoming Territory. Married a cattleman. Has 4 boys who all think they're men already." Zadie tied the cloth off. "You ever thought about going back?" "I did. After the war. But something in me was restless. I didn't know how to sit still." She regarded him for a moment, then returned to her stitching. "You seem still enough these days. I think I found what I was looking for." Theo stirred in the basket where he'd been napping. Zadie reached down and lifted him, settling him against her hip. Luke's eyes softened. "He's growing faster every week. I need to find someone who can teach me to make shoes. He's nearly outgrown the pair Miss Fenton stitched from that feed sack. I'll ask around the next time I'm in Los Animas. There's a cobbler near the rail yard." Zadie nodded but said nothing. Her thoughts were elsewhere, her gaze fixed on the window. Outside, the clouds hung low, heavy with the threat of rain. Later that week, a pair of wagons rolled into Dover, their canvas tops marked with soot. A family of 7 spilled out parents, 4 children, and an older man with a crooked leg. They'd come from Bent County, fleeing a fire that had caught their barn and spread to the cattle shed. Zadie watched the woman, tall, ash in her hair, hands cracked from hard-living stoop to gather spilled onions from the ground. Luke stepped beside her, his voice quiet. Another family pushed out. "Do you think it's them?" He shook his head. "Doesn't sound like it. They said lightning struck the roof. But it's too close for comfort." That night, Zadie worked late, mending a torn apron for one of the new arrivals. Theo slept near the stove, and Luke sat beside him, carving a small horse from a scrap of pine. His hands moved slow and patient, chips falling to the floor in soft taps. "You ever miss the trail?" Zadie asked, not looking up from her stitching. "There were parts of it I liked." "Which parts?" "Riding under stars so thick they looked like smoke. Coffee boiled over a mesquite fire. The sound of hooves when the herd moved as one." She paused. "And what didn't you like?" "Men who didn't care what damage they left behind." Zadie nodded. "I've met a few of those." Luke set the carving down, unfinished but already taking shape. "You're not the same woman I met in the hills." "I don't feel the same." "What do you feel?" She folded the apron and tied off the thread. "Like I'm becoming someone I used to be. Before the farm. Before John." Luke didn't speak right away. When he did, it was with a quiet steadiness. "There's a piece of land east of town. Small rise, view of the river. The man who owned it passed last spring. No one claimed it. Word is the county might sell it soon." Zadie looked up. "You thinking of buying it?" "I was thinking we could." The silence stretched, not heavy but full. Zadie leaned back in her chair. "That's no small thing." "I know. There be work. Lumber to haul. A well to dig. I'm not afraid of work." She looked at him, truly looked. "And what about Theo?" Luke's voice didn't waver. "He'd be my son same as any I'd raise." A long breath left her chest. "You're saying this like it's already decided." "No," he said. "Only that I've decided. The rest is up to you." Zadie stood and crossed the room, her bare feet quiet against the floorboards. She stopped in front of him, her hand brushing against his arm. "I never expected to feel safe again." "Not really." Luke looked up at her. "Do you?" She nodded. "With you I do." Thunder rolled somewhere beyond the hills, distant and soft. He rose slowly, careful not to wake the baby. They stood close, the heat of the fire casting their shadows long across the floor. Zadie reached up, her fingers resting against the side of Luke's face. Then let's build something that lasts. He bent his head, and their lips met with the kind of gentleness that carried weight. There was no rush, no fear, only the surety of two people who had walked through fire and found each other on the other side. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, steady and clean. The land east of Dover changed with the rains. Grass pushed up in faint green patches, and the cottonwoods near the river thickened with leaves that whispered against each other in the breeze. Zadie stood on the rise Luke had told her about. Theo balanced on her hip. The boy's fingers curled around her braid. The air smelled of wet clay and cedar smoke drifting up from a far-off cabin. Across the hilltop, Luke knelt near a flagged corner, checking the placement of a stake. "We'll need to level the south edge," he said, brushing dirt from his palm. "It dips a little too much for a foundation." Zadie shifted Theo to her other side. "Miss Fenton said the mason in Los Animas has a brother who lays stone. He might come out for the right price." Luke straightened, squinting into the sunlight. "We'll trade for it. I've got an old rifle he's been eyeing." Zadie looked out across the land, the river glinting beyond the bend, a strip of cottonwoods lining the low bank. "I want the kitchen window to face east," she said, "so I can see the morning come." He crossed to her side, brushing a burr from Theo's sleeve. "Then that's where we'll put it." They returned to town by dusk. Theo had long since fallen asleep, his warm weight slumped against Zadie's back, secured in a shawl she'd bartered for with her sewing. The boarding house kitchen was quiet when they entered, the supper dishes stacked and cooling. Miss Fenton had already retired to her upstairs room, her cane leaned near the stair rail. Luke lit the lamp on the side table. "I asked the stable hand today if he'd be willing to take on a helper when we move out there. Said he might send his boy to muck stalls and watch Theo a few hours each morning." Zadie unlaced her boots without looking up. "You already planning our days?" He sat across from her, resting his elbows on his knees. "Only if you want them." She pulled the shawl loose and lifted Theo into his cradle beside the stove. The baby stirred but did not wake. "I do," she said. "But there's something I haven't told you." Luke's shoulders straightened, but he said nothing. "I had a younger sister once," she continued. "Hannah. She got sick when I was 15. My father spent everything we had on a traveling doctor who never came back. I started working with him, my father, so we wouldn't lose what little we had. I never told John about her. I suppose I thought it didn't matter anymore." Luke's voice was low. "It matters. I think about her when I hold Theo, how she used to hum to herself when she brushed my hair. I want this life we're building to honor her, in some way." Luke reached across the table and took her hand. "Then we'll make it a life that remembers. A place where nothing gets left behind." They married 2 weeks later under the wide sky behind the boarding house. The preacher read from a leather-bound book, his voice thin but sure. Zadie wore a dress she'd altered from a widow's gown, the black dyed over with walnut husks to a warm brown. Luke had shaved, his hair trimmed neat by the schoolteacher's brother, who owned the only good pair of shears in town. Theo watched from Miss Fenton's lap, his eyes wide and unblinking. Afterward, Luke walked her down the slope behind the house where the cottonwoods cast long shadows and the earth held the day's heat. He stopped near the water barrel and took both her hands in his. "I never thought I'd stand still long enough to be someone's husband," he said. "But I want this more than I ever wanted the trail." Zadie leaned close, her voice barely above the breeze. "And I never thought I'd be someone's wife again. But with you I'm not afraid." They kissed under the cottonwoods, slow and certain as the sun dipped below the ridge. By mid-September, the stone foundation was laid. Luke built the walls himself with help from the stablehand's boy, whose payment came in the form of warm biscuits and a pair of stitched boots from Zadie. Each evening, Luke and Zadie measured framing boards by lantern light while Theo cooed from his blanket nearby. The house rose in pieces, timbers cut to fit, rafters notched by hand. Zadie carved their initials into the underside of the windowsill before the glass was set, a quiet mark of belonging. By the first hard frost, the roof was on. They moved in with a single trunk, a cradle, and a kettle. The rest they made together. Luke carved a table from cottonwood planks. Zadie stitched quilts from old shirts and flour sacks. Theo took his first steps across the packed earth floor before the boards were laid. Winter came soft that year. Snow dusted the hills but never drifted deep. Inside, the fire burned low and steady. Zadie stood at the stove most mornings, the smell of cornmeal and bacon thick in the air. Luke walked the fence each day, hammer in hand, checking for breaks. One night, as the wind howled outside and Theo slept curled in a bundle of wool, Luke sat beside Zadie on the edge of their straw mattress, his hand brushing hers beneath the covers. "I think he's going to be stubborn," Luke said, nodding toward the cradle. Zadie smiled. "He gets it honest." Luke turned toward her, his voice rough with something deeper than tiredness. "I want more children." "If you do." She looked at him, her heart warm. "I'd like nothing more." They lay down together, the lamp burning low, the wind slipping through the cracks in the shutters like a lullaby. Outside, the land was quiet. Inside, they were whole. Years passed. The house grew, one room added, then another. Theo grew into a boy who ran through the fields with a slingshot and a crooked grin. A little girl came next, with Zadie's eyes and Luke's calm, and then another son after that, born during a thunderstorm that shook the rafters but left the house standing firm. Zadie never stopped working with her hands. She built cabinets, repaired fences, and taught Theo how to plane a board true. Luke kept the fields tilled, the roof patched, and the hearth lit. Each evening they sat together on the porch, fingers brushing, eyes on the horizon. And though the world changed around them, new families, new roads, trains that whistled faintly in the distance, nothing ever shook the life they built. They had weathered fire and fear and the long silence that follows loss. And together they had made something that would last.